two, one, two, three.
Hello and welcome to Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. I'm here today with Professor Ian Greer. He's a research professor at ILR, Industrial and Labor Relations at Cornell, and he also directs the ILR Co-Lab. So, Ian Greer, explain what a co-lab is.
So the idea of the Ithaca Co-Lab is that there's a way to do engaged research and learning in the community to mobilize researchers and students to address labor problems in Ithaca and the surrounding region. It's inspired by something that was already happening in Buffalo. That the ILR school has an office there. It set up something called a co-lab. They've been there since 1947 doing educational programs and research for workers and social movements in Western New York. So the idea was we would try and do that kind of work here in Ithaca. So it's my job to kind of build that up.
You've told me you've done a good deal of research on unemployment. That is not to say the statistics about how many people are unemployed, which we usually hear in the news, but rather how the system of unemployment compensation, unemployment insurance works. Now, are you doing that on your own or with the co-lab?
So the co-lab is involved insofar as I'm working with community partners. For example, Legal Assistance of Western New York and I have worked together on a class, and we've organized internships for students to help out unemployed workers who are having problems getting their benefits, to support them. For example, if their benefits have been denied and they have to go to an administrative hearing. So that is kind of the main way that the co-lab is involved. I'm also involved in advocacy, which I suppose is also a co-lab matter too, providing information to policymakers, mainly in Albany, who are working to fix unemployment insurance and also create a new program for people who are excluded from unemployment insurance, like undocumented workers and self-employed people.
So how did you get into this interest in unemployment insurance?
About 20 years ago, I was a PhD student working in Chemnitz in East Germany. This is a place that is famous for a Karl Marx head and for having lots of factories that closed down after the collapse of communism. When I arrived there, I did not really understand what was happening. But one thing I learned was there had just been a big reform to the way that unemployment is managed in Germany, called the Hartz reforms. The idea of this was to change the system so that unemployed workers would be strongly encouraged to take low-wage, insecure jobs. It modernized the administration so that people would be trained and sort of pushed into those jobs. And it also deregulated labor law so that employers had more legal ways to create precarious work. So it was IG Metall, the manufacturers union in Chemnitz, that first educated me about these things. Coming out of the American labor movement, this was all new to me. This is not something that American unions normally work on. After that, I lived in London for 10 years, and there was something similar going on. But this time, the union I was working with was not a metal workers union. It was the union of the workers who administer the benefits. It's called the PCS union, and they're socialist and they're militant, and they work with claimants groups to fight against cuts to benefits, and other things that hurt unemployed workers and prevent staff from helping them kind of navigate in the labor movement. So I wrote some papers about privatization and changes in work, changes in the treatment of clients, of these workers. And that was kind of what I was writing up when I arrived in Ithaca 7 years ago.
Interesting. It actually sounds to me like some of these approaches to unemployment in Germany and maybe Britain were worse than what I experienced way back in, I guess it was 1981, 82 here in Ithaca, when I had been teaching English as a second language and got dumped very suddenly in the middle of the fall semester and was told that I didn't have any rights to get my job back, but I should apply for unemployment, which I did, and I got it. And at that time, the system seemed to be aiming at getting skilled people back into working in their areas of skills and not crowding into the low wage, competing with high school graduates or even people with even less education.
Yeah, well, you experienced what life was like before neoliberalism, in the United States. So the United States has this other thing that is going on, which is these agencies that administer benefits are severely underfunded. So they actually don't have the resources to do what is going on in Germany and Britain in quite as systematic a way. Like in Germany, these case managers who administer are part of the administrative apparatus of unemployment benefits. They really do stay in touch with employers and with people they've just placed in jobs. And if the job placement does not work out, it can be very disappointing for them, and they'll call up the worker who just became unemployed again and say, well, what happened? Why did you quit your job? Why did you get fired? And this puts pressure on people to be working rather than unemployed. The rules are such that it doesn't really take into account your skill level or what kind of work you want to do. It takes into account what jobs are available. And Britain is exactly that way as well, just not quite as well resourced. The United States, in principle, you are supposed to be looking for work. If you get a job offer, you're on unemployment, you're supposed to take it. That is, if it's an appropriate job offer. And there's all this kind of complicated law about what is appropriate. If you quit your job, you're not supposed to get unemployment in the United States unless it's good cause quit. And there's complicated law about that. So in the United States, there probably still is a bit more room for states to say, well, the system should really support people who are skilled to get the kinds of jobs that they really want. But in Germany and Britain, it has not been that way for, 10, 20 years.
Interesting. Now, I suspect that in my case, it may be that there was no, Cornell didn't contest my getting unemployment because contesting might have led to some much more embarrassing disclosures about why I was dumped.
Well, yeah. So one difference between the United States and other countries is that in the United States, employers contest their former workers' claims for unemployment benefits. And the reason they do this is that if their former workers succeed in getting UI, employers are charged more unemployment taxes. And that is just not how it works in Germany and the UK. So there is an incentive actually to contest claims. This is why many employers lodge frivolous objections to workers' UI claims. And this leads to administrative hearings, and it can be very stressful and daunting for workers to do them.
Well, say a little more about the United States, I guess, since that's where we are.
Yeah, well, this is what I was expected to teach about when I came to Cornell, because this is what students want to know about. This is what all the faculty are thinking about. This is these community partners I work with, National Employment Law Project, to a lesser extent, New York State Department of Labor, legal aid attorneys like Law New York. That's the context that they're in. And I mean, I learned a little bit about it through these hearings that students were helping out on, and legal aid attorneys would come into my class and play a recording of a hearing so students could understand all of kind of how that worked, the micropolitics of it, and just how hard it is for so many workers to get unemployment benefits. During the pandemic, I had to shift gears a little bit because with social distancing, it was completely unclear how I could get students working on these, working with the attorneys, and the attorneys themselves had difficulty just figuring out how they could serve their clients. And so I spent a lot of time just figuring out how the new benefits were working. So there were pandemic era benefits that worked really differently from classic UI benefits. The system was totally overloaded because the number of claims was unprecedented. We were all just shocked how many people lost their jobs in such a short period of time, and how many people were applying for unemployment benefits. And it was clear a lot of people were having problems with this, but it was hard to study that. I just started interviewing lots of unemployed people in the United States about their experiences during the pandemic, getting benefits, looking for jobs. Yeah, they were really struggling, obviously. I mean, one thing with this study that I had to think about is the states in the United States are all very different. So New York State is kind of an average UI system in terms of generosity and just percentage of workers who are covered. There are some states where only 10% of unemployed workers get unemployment insurance. This is Florida, North Carolina. And there are others where more than half of unemployed workers get unemployment benefits, like Massachusetts. So I was trying to figure out like why that is by actually talking to unemployed workers. So that was, I mean, I wanted to track people over time. So I've been doing this for the last almost 3 years. And I'm almost done with data collection on that. This project also brought me into connection with more with worker advocates who are working on legislative change, mainly coordinated by the National Employment Law Project, NELP. So over the past few months, I've been kind of working on some legislative things in New York State to try and make the benefits more generous, to improve the financing of the system so employers are paying more into it, and also create a new kind of benefit called the Unemployment Bridge Program for people who are excluded because they're self-employed or undocumented. So that kind of, I guess, brings you up to date a little bit in what I'm doing. I mean, the United States is really different from other countries in that, in many ways. I mean, I think the most important one probably is that in the United States, you only get 26 weeks of benefits in most states. And then you're switched onto a patchwork of means tested programs. And this means that the replacement rate, the percentage of your income that you're of your earned income from before you were unemployed that you're replacing with benefits is relatively lower than average for rich countries in the first 6 months. And then after that, when you exhaust your unemployment benefits, it is a tiny fraction if you're getting Medicaid, food stamps, TANF, that kind of thing. It's really a lot less generous than other countries.
So are you saying some countries have longer unemployment benefits?
Yes. So I spent so in the middle of the pandemic, I spent a year in Germany, and they have a much more comprehensive system. Like most countries, actually, the US is a bit of an outlier when it comes to how few people it covers and how not generous it is. So Germany has, for most people, a year of unemployment benefits that are set at a level that's related to your past earnings. So this can be generous if you were a high earner. And then after a year, you run out of that. So that's twice as long as our UI benefits. And then there's a means tested program, which is now called Bürgergeld. It used to be called Hartz IV, citizens' money. And this is kind of set at a rate in accordance to kind of what the kind of calculations of how much people need to live. So it's set, the idea is to secure a minimum level of existence for people who are unemployed but are not eligible for the main unemployment insurance program. And under that program, you automatically get housing benefits, you automatically get health care, plus you get paid cash benefits. So it's a much more comprehensive system than what we have. So we have a patchwork of benefits that you get if you're not eligible for UI. They have this system that is set out in a law, and it's administered by the same agency. I mean, people really struggle. It's the benefit levels are not really high enough in order to have a good life. They're high enough for people to survive. Also, there are strict work requirements, which can be a pain for people, especially people who don't want to work low-wage jobs.
Wait, this is in Germany or?
In Germany, yeah.
Mhm.
But it does cover everyone, right? It meets their basic needs, and that's what we don't have.
But wait, how can they meet work requirements if they can't find work?
Well, it's very easy to meet work requirements if you can't find work. All you have to do is send out some job applications and make a record of it. And if you ever get audited, you just show the agency this record that you have made of sending out job applications. Some states and countries might require you to go to a training course. So if there are no jobs, they can send you to a training course. You can satisfy your requirements doing that. There are all kinds of work search requirements that do not require there to be jobs. Actively looking for work does not imply that there are jobs. And so there are a lot of people who really just kind of go through the motions because there probably isn't a job available that is appropriate for them, but they have to show that they are looking for work. That's extremely common, not just in Germany, but also here.
Yeah, and actually that's again something where I remember finding that the unemployment office here in Ithaca was fairly, understanding that if I was to be looking for an academic job, I had to travel to academic meetings. And I think I was able to do that at least once or so during the whole thing.
Yeah, no, some of these agencies are really understanding. And while the United States system doesn't have enough resources, it also does not have like a clear rules that force everyone into low wage jobs. And so there is space and wiggle room and flexibility in this system for there to be understanding coaches and workers in the agencies that administer the benefits and are supposed to help you look for work. Certainly in workforce development, there are very progressive people around here, and they're working on issues like job quality and fixing low wage work and equality. So yeah, I mean, there's some good people who do this kind of work in this community and elsewhere.
So perhaps you can say a little more about what changes National Employment Law Project, was that its name? Did I get it right?
Yeah. So during the pandemic, there was a lot of attention on unemployment benefits. And NELP was an organization that had already been working on unemployment issues. But yeah, there was kind of, ever since then, there's been a lot of energy to try and fix the UI system and also deal with the problem that there's so many people who are not covered by it. And so, I mean, one important proposal is called the Unemployment Bridge Program. This is a proposal in New York State, and it would create a new kind of unemployment benefit for people who are excluded by the very logic of UI. So one of these groups is undocumented people, and it's kind of a strange thing. So according to the law of UI, if you are undocumented, you're not available to work because you're not available to work legally. Of course, undocumented people do work. They have to. They probably work more than documented people and native born people, but that's the legal fiction, and so they're excluded from UI. Also, formerly incarcerated people would have access to this program. Formerly incarcerated people who are unemployed looking for work can't get UI because if they've been incarcerated for longer than a year, they don't have an earnings history that they can take and show to New York State Department of Labor and show that they're connected to the labor force and therefore should be getting benefits. Self-employed people whose earnings have been under a certain threshold, they are also eligible for this new program. Self-employed people are not included in UI. They were included in the big pandemic program, PUA. And this is super important because there's so many people in these kind of gray areas where it's states and employers and workers all have different ideas about whether they are workers or self-employed. So-called gig workers are a good example of that. Uber drivers are actually supposed to be getting state UI, but they're properly, so part of this is to make sure that Uber drivers are getting state UI and not this unemployment bridge program funds, but other self-employed people who become unemployed and are looking for work, they would be eligible for this as well. So that's one really important proposal in New York. There's something like that has been passed in Colorado, and there are some other states trying to do this as well. It's not a federal program, it's a state program. And then there's one thing that is very likely to pass is something that my legal aid friends have been pushing, and they have written bills to help people who are victims of mistakes by New York State Department of Labor. So there's this problem that people have been overpaid, and it's not necessarily their own fault. It's because they have been poorly informed about whether they are eligible. There were confusing questions on forms. These are supposedly improper payments, and sometimes they're even called fraudulent. But often there's no fraud in the sense of willful statements of false information. And so in these cases where there's no fault by claimants, this legislation forgives these overpayments that were made during the pandemic. And sometimes people are being asked for $10,000-$20,000 to be paid back to the state. Collections are being called. So this is going to remove a huge headache for thousands and thousands of New Yorkers. And the final thing is financing. We have to bring more money into the system in order to fund further improvements, especially improvements in benefits. Our benefit levels are pretty mediocre. They're lower than all of the surrounding states. And unlike any of the surrounding states, we don't have a dependent allowance for people who are caring for children or other family members. And so what we are trying to do is change the financing so that employers of higher earners are charged more. This is called increasing the taxable wage base. And this would take if we increase it enough, that means increasing the amount of each worker's pay that is taxed for UI. We can actually reduce the rate at which those wages are taxed, and we can take the burden off of small business and shift it onto big business. So those are kind of the three main things that we're working on, and hopefully we can make these fixes at the state level. And then what I really would like to see is fixes at the federal level, but that's a whole other story.
Thank you, Ian Greer. Interesting look into unemployment insurance and how New York State is a bit of a laggard. This has been Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. Thank you for watching.